Good evening. This is February the 10th, and we are here tonight with Independent Nation, which is a show every second Monday. And tonight we are truly going to be talking about the independence of the nation. As usual, my co-host, Bauman Yazdanfar, and tonight we have three interesting guests who I will invite to introduce themselves.
I'm Peter Dunn.
I'm Gwen.
I'm Trish Moon.
And all three of them are well qualified and interesting guests on the continuation of our topic of citizenship. 2 weeks ago, we talked about the question of whether citizenship should be required to vote in municipal elections. And almost on cue from our federal government, we have had lots of action on the citizenship front just in the last week or so. The government of Canada is getting ready to amend the Citizenship Act, and one of the most interesting provisions is that they want to legislate the right to strip dual citizens of Canadian citizenship under certain circumstances, leaving aside what those circumstances may be, just on the principle of being able to strip a Canadian citizen of his or her citizenship. Your thoughts, Bauman?
Well, in last week or two, actually, there were a couple of interesting news. One was the Fair Election Act came at the same time as a citizenship discussion that was around the Ottawa. And interestingly enough, when I was reading that Fair Election Act, which every voter has to produce at least 2 pieces of picture ID, as I heard, and many other restrictions, I found out very interesting that this government called it Fair Election Act, and it introduced it at the same time that they are mandating the citizenship. And the first question came to my mind is, if it is Fair Election Act, that means the last 3 election was unfair.
Interesting.
That was the first thing came to my mind. And if it has been unfair, that means this government is not legitimate.
Well, Bauman, would it be legitimate even if it had been a fair election?
Well, at least they couldn't cover it or package it that nicely for the public.
Well, there's been a lot of action from the government in the last week or so. Peter, your thoughts on should the government of Canada be able to strip dual citizens of Canadian citizenship?
Well, you're probably asking the wrong person, because I don't really believe in dual citizenship as it's practiced in the world today. Because I think it puts a person into a question of dual loyalties. And if you have dual loyalties, how can you, I don't understand how it's paradoxical, particularly if the two nations in which you have citizenship are at war with one another or are rivals, then it becomes difficult. I think basically I believe in one nationality at a time.
Interesting point, but your reason is that you believe that citizenship implies loyalty. Gwen, your thoughts on that? Is part of citizenship loyalty to a country?
I'd say yes, it's part of it, but I wouldn't say that being a dual makes you loyal to 2 different countries.
Why would you say that?
Because I am a dual, so-called dual, and just because I happen to be a dual citizen doesn't mean that I'm loyal to both of the countries that I'm supposed to citizen of.
Interesting. How would you spell dual?
On guard, no. D-U-A-L.
Peter, you would presumably spell it D-E-U-L?
Yes, I guess so, because I think that they're in conflict with one another.
Interesting. Trish, your thoughts on that? Does dual citizenship put one presumptively in conflict, divided loyalties?
So I take a totally different feeling than Peter has. When I was a dual citizen, I didn't feel in conflict because I lived here. So the aspect of being dual was simply recognizing that I was American, but my life was here. So loyalty, I don't know. It's just an issue of what's practical as far as I'm concerned. If I live here, I pay taxes here, I follow the laws here. I raise my son with more of a Canadian point of view than an American one, but loyalty, I don't have that issue.
Bauman, what do you think citizenship even is?
Actually, before we get to that, what is citizenship? Peter brought up a very interesting point, the loyalty of the dual citizenship. Then what's happened to the loyalty of the government of Canada? Just a few days ago, they signed an agreement with the United States with nothing in it for the Canada to rat out those who called American persons or U.S. persons. So where is the base of the loyalty of government of Canada that lives based on by taxpayers' money?
So you believe that governments have a loyalty to their citizens?
Shouldn't they?
Well, I would ask Peter that question. Peter?
Well, I think the first mandate of government is to protect the citizens in the country. And that's why we have government in the first place. The older form of government is just the most powerful family comes and gets the biggest army and then basically takes over the country and forces everybody to pay them taxes.
Sounds like something out of a Mario Puzo novel.
Maybe. So it's a form of organized crime. But in constitutional government, it's the people who form the government in order to protect themselves from possible threats, either external or internal. So if the government fails to protect the citizens, then they've lost their reason to be, their raison d'être.
Well, now you're raising an interesting point. What your comment seems to me to assume is that government should be at the service of the people that democratically elected them. Gwen, your thoughts on that?
Yeah, I agree. I think my loyalty was to Canada until Canada just betrayed me, the government did. And I would have been, I have been a loyal so-called citizen of Canada, and I feel betrayed. So I think, the people are the government, but this government doesn't seem to think that. This government seems to think that they are the dictators and they're telling us what we have to do or telling whomever what they have to do, and I'm at their mercy. I have no way to deal with that, and I don't know what to do.
So you're seeing a bit of what you think is a role reversal here.
Yes. Yeah, absolutely. They're basically dictating what is going to be, and I don't have any power.
Trish, should citizens have power?
No. I don't think so. They should. That's the idea, right? But the governments all seem to be pretty connected to business and the corporate world, and that's exactly what happened with the FATCA. The banks got chosen over the citizens, so I understand why Gwen would feel betrayed.
Your betrayal is over FATCA?
Yes, absolutely.
Well, maybe we better pause for a moment then. It occurs to me that we haven't even really introduced FATCA. Perhaps Bauman would like to introduce FATCA. It's called Foreign Account Tax Compliance Act. That is by the U.S. government. There's a blogger in Dubai who calls it Fear and Terror Caused by America. And there are a number of other acronyms. But Bauman, tell us about FATCA.
Well, FATCA was or is a policy of IRS, a company, a corporation, south of the border that ask sovereign nations, a government, official government elected by people like government of Canada, to cave in and provide information about the citizens or ex-citizens or half ex-citizens, if we call dual citizenship, to the IRS in order to collect money, and not only doesn't end there, but also provide administrative work for them through the banks or charter banks in Canada, which is paid or subsidized by taxpayer of Canada. That means very soon, after February 5th, which they signed this agreement, and it will come to the effect of July 1st, which is Canada Day, coincidentally, the whole Canada pays part of their money to become a collection agency for IRS. So
All
IRS
Canadians pay their money to become collection agents for the IRS.
government, yes. It's like have you seen those people who ticket the parking to give parking ticket in Toronto area?
I have.
Okay, they are giving you the ticket, but the administrative of the collection is done by provincial government. The same principle applies here. It's a private company south of the border, different sovereign nation, asked the government of Canada to force the banks to become collective, to do the collection for the IRS, for those who either were born there or just had to travel there for a while, or whatever reason the definition they come with.
So in other words, are you saying the banks are essentially giving parking tickets to Americans?
No, banks are collecting the money or the information to give for those parking tickets that is supposed to be issued by IRS.
I see. So they're doing the heavy lifting, in other
Yes,
words.
and not only that, I am very surprised that Treasury brought the word betrayal. If as a citizen, as a Canadian citizen, if I divulge any information that affect the country, government, or nation, I will be tried as a spy. And yet our government provides information about the citizens, which is private, and the divulging of those information should be protected under the Privacy Act. And nobody goes after the government. It is a criminal act.
Agreed.
It is under the law, under the Section 70A. Every person who spies for the enemy is guilty of an offense and conviction, imprisonment for life or to less punishment.
But that would apply only if the United States were an enemy.
But we are providing information of the citizen to a foreign nation.
Well,
It is a private information given to the foreign nation.
but the statute specific, I'm reading it off your screen, it says enemy. Is the United States an enemy?
Does the government of Canada has consent of all of those 1 million Americans here before go to this agreement?
Okay, all right, interesting. Maybe we can simplify a little bit, okay? In its most essential terms, in one or two sentences, what is this FATCA thing all about? What does it actually say? What does it require? One of the three of you want to give us the answer to that? Peter?
It requires that the banks around the world, what the United States calls foreign financial institutions, give the information of American citizens abroad and, well, within the country as well. Anyone who's an American citizen or an American or a United States person, they have to collect their bank account information and send that to the IRS. So that's, in a nutshell, what it's about. And so what the government of Canada has done is they've signed an intergovernmental agreement in which they define what bank accounts are exempt from the requirements, such as our registered retirement accounts, our RESPs, our RDSPs, our TFSAs, and also what account levels would then be it's a little bit hard to explain, but if you have, say, for example, $50,000 in your bank account, then the bank is required to do an electronic search to see if you're a U.S. person. And if you have $1 million, then they have to do more exact searches. So these thresholds are there in order to require the bank to find information about the client.
So in other words, in its most essential terms, what the government of Canada is doing is essentially helping the United States enforce one of its laws on Canadian soil? Is that what's happening?
Well, basically, yes. The problem is that what a U.S. person is so broadly defined that it does not take into account international law. And first of all, there's the master nationality rule, which says that if a dual citizen is living in one of the countries of his dual citizenship, that country has the right to treat that person as if he is only a citizen of that country. So as long as you're in Canada and you're Canadian citizenship, you're a Canadian citizen. It doesn't matter what other citizenships you have. The master nationality rule says that you're to be treated as a Canadian citizen only. Now, what the United States has done is basically taken a club and said, no, you're going to treat our citizens as United States persons. And it doesn't matter if they're living in Canada. For the sake of the agreement, all United States citizens are resident in the United States. It says it right in the agreement.
But isn't it worse the way you're describing it? I mean, if they're ignoring what you're calling the master nationality rule, then isn't the agreement saying not only are we able to define who these U.S. citizens are, but given the existence of the master nationality rule, in fact, we, Canada, are telling you that they are not your citizens in this country. Is that accurate?
Well, I think that's exactly right, because what they have said is that a U.S. citizen is considered, for the sake of this agreement, resident in the United States. And according to the IRS, according to the United States Tax Code, we are residents of the District of Columbia.
There must be something wrong with that.
That's a perfect fiction.
Well, it does sound fictional, actually. It sounds totally fictional. Gwen, your thoughts on that?
Yeah, I mean, I grew up in Canada. Why should I be considered a U.S. person?
Because they say so.
Well, that's too bad. I mean, I was shocked when I first heard this, that this can't possibly be the case. Like, I have to file some kind of tax return to a foreign country? Why? I've grown up in Canada. I've never worked anywhere but Canada. I've never voted anywhere but Canada. I've never traveled on anything but a Canadian passport. So why am I suddenly being deemed a U.S. person who now has to file and pay all kinds of extra taxes and, be subject to some sort of huge penalties because I didn't file things that I didn't know I was supposed to file?
Talk to us about taxes. And actually, on that note, Trish, I remember 2 weeks ago you raised some question about penalties and fines that you might be subjected to as a U.S. citizen.
I did, but I was pointing out that I didn't know. I didn't read it correctly. I just took it at base value where, for not filing FBAR, where you would have that $10,000 penalty per account per year. Is that what you're referring to?
Yeah.
For FBAR, foreign bank account report.
Right, for the FBAR.
Okay.
That's actually not quite correct because usually, well, I guess in the programs they do it differently, and I suppose they could. But I was terrified because I counted all our bank accounts for the 8 years since the OVDP was 2009. That was what it referred to. We would have owed $455,000. And my husband's not even American. That's his money. I was just stymied by it. I couldn't believe it.
And as I recall, your response to that was you decided you'd had it with your American citizenship.
I decided that no matter what, if they were going to try and find me, that I would just never go there. I was not going to put up with that.
Are you still an American?
No.
You renounced
I did.
because of that?
Primarily, yeah. And my husband, he just absolutely does not want his information reported to the IRS. And I can appreciate that. And I felt like I had to protect my family. I mean, to ask my husband to let me stay American and then possibly be fined and all this nonsense, no, that isn't right. You have no right to his money.
Well, they have no right to his money, but what Gwen's saying is they don't have any right to her money either. That is even the right of an American living in Canada. Gwen, you mentioned taxes and penalties. Can you elaborate on that a little bit?
Well, I mean, even if the banks are not required to report the fact that you have RESPs, RDSPs, and TFSAs, does not mean that the United States still doesn't consider those to be taxable items.
Correct.
Which means that you have to report those things and they can be taxed and will be taxed. But why should my children's RESP that I've put money into and my Canadian government has also put money into, why should that be taxed by the IRS? That's ridiculous.
Well, those types of things, as I understand, are not even taxable in Canada. Is that right?
Right. They're not taxable.
Okay.
I mean, they're taxable at the end. Obviously, you take them out in the end because it's deferred, but IRS is not going to consider them deferred. They're going to tax you now.
Only the RRSPs, they allow that.
Yes, but you have to file a bunch of paperwork and make sure that you've got that all in order, else they're not going to necessarily give you the exemption. But I mean, another thing that I'm absolutely appalled at is that I'm supposedly going to have to pay a 30 to 40% capital gains tax on the sale of my house in Canada just because I was born in the U.S.?
That really is quite extraordinary. I mean, leaving aside the philosophical issue of whether a principal residence should be taxed or not, what's incredible about that is that it's a home in Canada. I mean, it has no connection whatsoever to the United States. Bob, would you consider that to be sort of an extraterritorial money grab?
Well, yes. First of all, the Minister of the Finance claims, based on the readings that I had, RRSP and RESP are exempt, but they are put in the annex part of this agreement, which can be changed by a couple of the paper pushers.
Can I say one thing, though?
Yeah.
They're only exempt from reporting by the bank. They're
Yeah,
not
yes.
exempt from being taxed
Oh, no,
by
no.
the IRS.
What I'm saying is from the functionality of the banks. But again, they are not part of the actual contract or agreement. It's part of the annex of the agreement. That means even without notice or without informing the minister, a couple of people in the office, they can change it. But coming back to your question about my property in Canada be taxed by a foreign nation, it just comes back to the Roman times. If we are mighty, they go and they invade the place, and it is a spoil of the war. And the way that I look at it, look at this agreement is like that, because when I glanced at the agreement, I didn't go through that carefully, but I went through the pages. The first thing I noticed was very interesting. If there is an agreement between two people, two parties, two companies, two countries, there is something for something. It's like you go to a pizza shop, you give $20, you get a pie of pizza. So it's very straightforward transaction. In this transaction, there is nothing for Canada. It's just the terms of the surrender. Nothing but terms of the surrender. And I am just wondering if government of Canada took something for it, why they are not announcing it? If he didn't, why?
I have an idea about why.
Peter?
Well, I have to agree with Bauman about his original claim that giving what was it about the enemy that you read?
It's Section 78 of the Criminal Code of Canada, which under the National Defense Act, that claims that anyone who gives the information that affects the country, and because
to an enemy,
to enemy, yes,
Right.
yes,
To an enemy.
and when you're talking about the Roman method, or actually it's the older method of government, was that if you were strong enough, you would go and first of all take over your own country, and then you'd start going from city to city in other countries and taking tribute and perhaps killing the people. But if they just gave you the money, then you would go home, and then you'd go back in 3 or 4 years when they had a little bit more money again.
And I bet you, because of this legislature, I'm pretty sure we will have a lot of casualties, but they are uncleared casualties.
Yeah.
People who have heart attack, people who have who lose their medication, people who lose their family. These are all casualties of the war. But because it is not like a mass scale, or it's not being advertised or announced, it doesn't mean that it's not there.
Well, they're clearly casualties of U.S. citizenship as well, it seems to me, or at least U.S. citizenship abroad. But, what I find extraordinary about this is that, I mean, those of you obviously feel that this is an unjust, a bad thing, a horrible thing. Bauman, you've talked about the fact that the government of Canada has essentially become the agent of the United States.
Collection agent.
No, much more than that. No, an identification agent first. Let's go find them.
Oh, I'm sorry, banks are collection agency, and the government is the...
Well, the banks, in sort of an agreement with the government of Canada, under this, seem to me to be going out and doing their best to identify U.S. persons then explore the possibility of levying taxes and penalties against them because they're U.S. persons. I mean, is that an accurate assessment?
Well, it's not. It doesn't end here, by the way. If any ordinary Canadian who thinks he or she is not born in the United States or it's not being affected is wrong, because the moment bank starts to do a paperwork, that means there is money. They have to put resources. And where do they get the bankers the money? From your service fees. So if you see after July 1st or 3 months after that, your service fee when you go and get a cash from your bank machine jump 25 cents or 10 cents or 20 cents, or your service bank in your bank account goes up, don't sit and wonder what's happened. Banks don't lose money. They are like casino. They never lose money.
Yes, they are. Well, my thought when I saw this FATCA IGA was probably safe to invest in bank shares again.
Opportunist.
Well, just dealing with the world as it is. But, it's interesting, your description, Bauman, gave me the following thought. We started this off, this has been, a big week for citizenship issues in general. And we have, on the one hand, via the Citizenship Act, the government of Canada is proposing to strip dual citizens of their citizenship. Now, the way you're talking about this FATCA thing, it sounds to me as though there's a very real possibility that U.S. persons in Canada are going to be stripped of their retirement savings.
Right.
And I'm wondering if that's actually how you see it, number one. That's the first question. The second question I'd like to get your thoughts is, why in God's name would the government of Canada do this?
I think because they want to get the pipeline deal.
So in other words, they're going to agree to become a collection agency or identification company or whatever for the United States in return for the pipeline. Well, I don't know if we have an announcement on that yet. Peter?
Well, I think it's because the banks have heavily invested in the United States. TD Bank is very invested in the United States. They've put billions of dollars into it. And that there is this uncomfortable relationship now between politicians and banks. It's all over the Western world. And so whatever the bankers want or need, they seem to manage to be able to get that from government nowadays. And
Why would the banks need this, though?
Because it's a clear violation of a person's charter rights and human rights if the bank singles out American citizens for special treatment. It's a form of discrimination.
But because they're going to get their 30% with
Oh yeah, and there's also they don't want. They need that's why they need the agreement so that it's the CRA that betrays the Americans in Canada.
Okay, so the banks are really looking for the protection from the government of Canada.
Correct.
Yeah, but as I said, there's a 30% withholding, which is a form of economic sanction against a country with which you're
30% withholding or 30% of taking it?
Of transfer. Yeah, they say
Taking
that. That's what it is. They're
Is
going to take
withholding the right
30%
word?
of transfer fees to the United
Are they
States
giving it back?
from the United States.
Are they giving it back?
You know, that's not even clear.
Actually, it is clear. The answer is no.
No?
Well, it's just a straight.
pure steal.
So you can't file a tax return form to
Oh,
get that money back?
no. This is a penalty, as I understand it, imposed directly on the banks that's completely independent of any individual depositor.
Well, that would just be theft then.
Exactly.
Theft.
Yeah.
Theft.
I've heard worse terms.
Basically, what we're seeing is that the United States is returning to the old way of doing things. That is, the more powerful nation can take whatever it wants from the less powerful nations.
And it's disgusting.
It's disgusting.
It's absolutely disgusting.
And
Let's just pause here for 1 second, okay? And, this is obviously my fault, all right? We're sort of all over the place. And what I'm getting, okay, from the discussion, just to be clear on what FATCA actually says, okay, leaving aside these agreements and that, the law, as I understand it, simply says that every non-U.S. bank is required to enter into a specific agreement with the Internal Revenue Service, pursuant to which they are going to first, at their expense, identify, and then second, turn over the account information of anybody who the United States chooses to define as a U.S. person now and in the future. And if they fail to do that, the U.S. will simply take 30% of money, of U.S. dollars going to that bank. That's my understanding of what the basic statute says. And that presumably would, provide the motivation or the reason for the banks wanting to get some help on this.
Isn't it 30% of the money going to and out of the bank that goes through the United States? So it's twice as much as what?
Where did you get that?
Any transaction that goes in or out of the bank that goes through the United States will have a 30% withholding.
You know what I find interesting about this is, not that I'm a FATCA scholar, far from it, but what I find interesting is that it's hard to even get any agreement on what it is, other than bad.
Yeah.
But you have to understand, at least in Canada, I don't know about other countries, but at least in Canada, banks supposed to follow under the rules of the Bank Act. And that is why federal government is crucial or pivotal point in this agreement. If IRS could directly deal with banks individually, they wouldn't even need this agreement. After all, United States financial sectors and banking system has been all over the world since 1913 when they created Federal Reserve Bank, which was very sneaky way to do that. IRS came after that in 1919, and after that they started to get as much as money they could. There is no ifs and buts about it. And when you say there is contradiction between politicians and bankers, I disagree. I think politicians are in the pocket of bankers.
Oh, no, I didn't say contradiction. I said collaboration.
Oh, collaboration. Oh, sorry. I thought
something to that effect.
Yeah. Competition. I heard competition. So whatever happens, doesn't matter if it's 30%, 10%, 20%. The question is, here we come to the actual meaning of knowledge is power. And knowledge in this case is your personal information.
Well, and U.S. people think that, for instance, the actual FATCA form, the 8938, it's an extension of FBAR, and they can add whatever they like. If they decide to add your property, then you have to do that part. And a lot of people think that one of the functions of FATCA will simply be to be very aware of what actual wealth people have, so that when the estate tax kicks in, they know exactly already what you've got. Or that they could even confiscate it if they wanted it.
Why don't we submit a spreadsheet of whatever we have at home?
Well, I did that when I filed my 8854. So here if you want to leave the United States, you have to explain to them what your assets are. And I think that this is, in fact, a violation of, what has been known for many centuries in English common law as a man is the king of his castle, or his home is his castle. The idea that the king doesn't have the right to go into a man's house and take an inventory of what he has in his house, because his house is his castle. And
Are you familiar with writs of assistance?
no.
Well, I don't know a lot about them, but writs of assistance were essentially, were responsible in part for the American Revolution. These British soldiers would come in and just kind of look around.
You see what they needed?
Well, see what was there, whether they needed it or not. I think that's the point. You're right. The point of information returns, of which something like the 8938 or the FBAR, are just examples, is precisely that, to inventory assets.
But and what you said, or what Peter just said, is they're actually extorting you when you want to leave the country. And you are not the ownership of, you don't own your citizenship in that case. They own your citizenship, and you have to pay them to give it up.
Well, if you're rich enough, you
Yeah.
pay them.
Well, everybody
doesn't
has
take
to
much.
pay. You either pay them directly or you pay in the form of, fancy accounting fees and,
Right.
all those kinds of things. But the language going around this table is extraordinary. You're reading a statute talking about enemies. We have language like extortion.
Well, I can give you something good
And,
too.
it's interesting. I was drawn to my attention this afternoon a very interesting article on this agreement that the government signed with the Internal Revenue Service by somebody named Don Whiteley. And I'm going to read you some things out of this. I'm just curious what your reaction to them is. Here he's saying, under negotiation for 2 years, this new tax information sharing agreement. Is it a tax? I'm not even sure it's a tax agreement, but okay. Now listen to this. Represents a colossal surrender of financial sovereignty for Canada. What do you think of that?
Exactly.
Would you agree with that?
Absolutely.
Yes, it's terms of surrender.
Yeah.
Period.
Yeah, and it actually has nothing to do with tax. That's just the way they link it in your mind to the tax treaty, so that people think, oh, there's nothing we can do about it.
It says, though, a colossal surrender of financial sovereignty. I mean, would you restrict that just to financial? It seems to me it's an awful lot more than that. I mean, look at it this way. So, what FATCA says in its original terms is that essentially the banks are required to do what the IRS says when they say it, now or in the future. I mean, doesn't it seem to you that the effect of that is to put the American government really in charge of the banking industry in Canada, or is that alarmist?
It could go that
That's
way.
exactly right.
You think it could go that way? You think it's
It
exactly
is.
right, Peter?
Yeah.
That's a yes, Bauman?
It is tip of the iceberg. Just
Only the
big
tip of the iceberg. I can always count on him to be a minimalist.
Yes.
Do tell. Tip of the iceberg.
Because you see, years back, I used to teach sales, and I used to tell to the audience, when you go and try to do process of the selling from the prospecting to closing, you have to follow certain rules, certain steps, certain chains, part of the chain. The same thing applies here. If they send troops to Canada, it's considered as an act of war. But if little by little penetrate through the industry, through the taxing issue, through the banking issue, one day you get up, wake up, to open your eyes, take the curtain out, and you see dual flag in front of your street. One of them United States flag.
And then?
And then, eventually, the one flag, the old one, will be disappear, and you become 51st state,
Well, they want our natural resources.
which they have it already.
On that note, remarkably, this is amazing. I never would have thought of this. What Don Whiteley now says, okay, you're talking about this sort of creeping assault. What he's saying, for the U.S., is arguably the most successful assault on Canada since the War of 1812.
Well,
Actually, for those of us who have any, I wasn't around in 1812, I don't think, but I don't think that it was a successful assault on Canada.
there
in the War of
was no,
1812, was it?
that is the oxymoron, because there was no
What he must mean, arguably,
the attempt.
the most attempted assault
Yeah.
on Canada.
Well, they did assault Canada.
Yes, but it was not successful.
Not a successful assault.
Well, depends on what you mean by success.
Well,
They actually invaded Canada. That part was
And
successful.
we're repelled, though. This one.
On that note, if we followed the footstep of the 1812, I believe, if I'm not mistaken,
1812, yeah.
still there is a chance to not let this assault take place. Because in that agreement, there is, first of all, although it's a little bit of the contradictory, in one part it says there is 12 months notice to go through the cancellation of this agreement. And in another part it says it has to be in effect at least to the December of 2016, which is more than 12 months. But just being there, it gives an opportunity for those like-minded individuals who don't agree with this, go ahead. And even I suggest, my opinion. I am not a lawyer and I don't know. I suggest even class action lawsuit against federal government.
Oh, people have
Yeah.
already got that in mind.
Actually, he talks about that also. This is
Oh, I
very
didn't read that. Are you copying my?
Well, no, I'm reading it while you're talking. I mean, this is quite interesting. He says there's several blogs devoted to opposing Canada's capitulation on FATCA, or any indication class action suits are already in the works, as people now have something they can take to a lawyer. The million or so U.S. persons in Canada who will be caught up in this, along with another 2 to 3 million members also affected, are for the most part outraged and feel they have been betrayed. I think that was your language,
Yes.
wasn't it, Gwen? By their banks and now their adopted country. They are looking for, look at this language, revenge.
Oh,
No, we want justice, not revenge.
wow.
Interesting
I
distinction.
think
Justice,
so.
not revenge. That sounds like an idea.
I go beyond
I agree,
that. So
but-
you just need protection.
Yes, we need.
Not justice, not revenge.
We should be-
You're entitled to justice as long as you pay your taxes.
And under the charter, we should be protected.
Well, here I have here the section 15 of the part
What
1.
does that say? Section 15.
Equality right. Every individual is equal before and under the law and has the right to the equal protection and equal benefit of the law without discrimination, I might add. And in particular, without discrimination based on race, national or ethnic origin, color, religion, sex, age, or mental or physical disability.
Right.
So that means if you were born in the United States and so happened your daddy and mommy were enjoying themselves over there, you should not be discriminated against
Right.
under Charter of Rights in Canada. Now, either we agree with this charter or we don't. If we don't, why don't we close the door of this store called Canada and put the flag of United States? If it's not, why do we discriminate against 1 million plus?
Interestingly, on that note again, borrowing from Mr. Whiteley, he actually talks about Section 15 of the Charter, and what he says is, he's referring to constitutional expert Peter Hogg, who was at one time, I believe, Dean of Osgoode Hall Law School, but he's saying, according to Hogg, any legislation that allows banks to single out for special treatment Canadian citizens and residents who are also U.S. persons would be discriminatory in a way that would not withstand Charter scrutiny and would be a violation of Section 15 of the Charter. Gwen, would you agree with that?
I would 100% agree with that because it is discrimination against people based on their nationality. And I also think it would be a violation of, I think, Section 8, where you should be protected against unlawful search and seizure, because there is no proof that any of these people that they're trying to hand over to the IRS have done anything wrong. Is that not search and seizure?
I don't know.
Search, for sure.
Ask Peter.
Possible seizure.
Is it search and seizure, Peter?
Well,
It's not a seizure. It's
I think
probably
it's
search.
really a fishing expedition.
Right.
Basically, the concept goes back in English common law to what's called a general warrant, where the king issues general warrants, which means that you can go into anybody's house anywhere and search for any kind of contraband or anything that the king needs, or money or whatever. And there are no limits. Now, what we have in Canada and in the United States, for that matter, are specific warrants. It has to have the name of the person whose house is going to be searched. It has to have the address of the house, and in order to obtain such a warrant, the police officer has to show reasonable cause to a judge, who then will allow the warrant to be issued for search. Now, basically, laws like FATCA and the Foreign Bank Account Report are circumventions of in the United States, the Fourth Amendment, and in Canada, would you say, Article 8?
Yes.
Even Article 7 does that too.
But from the American point of view, I mean, surely it's not an unreasonable search because of the assumption that all Americans abroad are evading taxes, right? I mean, that would be the assumption.
Yeah, that is the assumption.
I mean, this is the language that comes out of the United States every day, on this topic.
And that's the way they spin it, too. It makes people in Canada think, oh, well, they're just going after Americans who live in Canada. Well, they're not paying attention to the fact that they're Canadians who happen to have U.S. connections of some sort.
Let me add to that. If those who say that I saw some of those comments on the internet and the blogs as well, oh, let's go after those Americans that hide the money and all of that. Let me ask this question. Let's put the issue of American aside. We have about 130, 140 different nationalities who reside in Canada out of 191. And we have high concentration of the Chinese population, South Asian population, Indian, Pakistani, and Bangladeshi, and so on. We have high concentration of even Irish and English and Germans here. Now, if this, that is why I said this is the tip of the iceberg. What's happened tomorrow if Chinese government, because especially they had a deal for $15 billion, they purchased the oil, two oil companies a couple of years ago. If they come and say, hey, now that we have $15 billion invested in your country, we need to have all of the information of the Chinese descent here. What would happen then?
That's a good question to ask Peter, I think. Peter, your thoughts on that?
Well, it would be a good idea for China.
Of course, the same as United States.
Yeah.
Another thing that strikes me about this is, so we have the government of Canada essentially participating in a search of U.S. citizens at the behest of the American government, and this costs them money. But, one really must ask, if the result of this is that these U.S. persons have to pay a whole bunch of taxes to the United States, doesn't this actually hurt Canada? In other words, to put it another way, hasn't Canada just entered into an agreement where, one, they got nothing at all in return, which is bad, but two, they are paying the cost of actually locating people that are then going to be forced to send a bunch of their capital, their Canadian earned capital, outside of Canada to the United States. Isn't this, in effect, just a sort of a charge, a permanent tax on the Canadian economy?
And not to mention people going on welfare because of it.
No, not only that. You have to understand even the feasibility value or this value of this process. First, Government of Canada has to provide or establish a resource for this purpose.
Right.
That means salaries, offices, and so on. So it's extra cost. Lose some of the taxes because you people have to pay to the United States. So the revenue comes down, cost goes up. Therefore, the surplus and debt goes high. Then they have to cut the social services. When they cut the social services, the ramification of that is higher crime, higher poverty, higher health issues, and so on. It's not just a one item that you can isolate it. It's like you have a goulash and you want to separate each part of that goulash when you're serving it.
So in other words, what you're really saying, in part, is that FATCA will increase crime in Canada. Is that right? Is that what you're saying?
I am pretty
That's
sure
why they're building more
it
prisons.
causes.
They knew.
It causes.
Well, since FATCA is a crime, yes.
FATCA is a crime which increases crime. Okay.
Maybe we'll be in the
that's
new
interesting.
prisons that they're building, and they're going to support us all in prison.
Us all meaning?
Us U.S. persons who've been
Special prison for
ferreted
U.S.
out.
persons?
Yes.
Well, actually, the presumed humor of that aside, if in fact the result of this is that the very existence of Americans in Canada would, at least has the potential to result in depletion of Canada's capital, both now and in the long run. Many thoughts on whether this would affect immigration policy?
Of course.
Good question.
Of course.
Almost
Interesting.
certainly.
Certainly.
But you know what, it makes me wonder if Canada then would say, get rid of the Americans.
Yeah.
You know, we'll strip them of their dual citizenship, you know?
Yeah, well, coming full circle to where we started, I mean, that's very interesting because, I couldn't imagine, this would happen in the short run, but, once these laws are on the books, this is always a problem. But, so last week we have simultaneously, on the one hand, amending, the thought of amending the Citizenship Act to be able to strip dual citizens of their citizenship. On the other hand, signing on to FATCA, giving a very, very good reason to not have U.S. citizens in Canada.
Absolutely.
If you look at the other side of the coin, what would happen if we get the dual citizenship off, and those who are in Canada become Canadian, not American? Do they still have to follow or fall into the regulation of FATCA?
Well,
I don't think they should even right now.
No. I mean,
Yes.
even
No.
from perspective of even government. Let's say government or wise, sage. Not to mention they are just auctioneers,
So I'm
auction in
thinking-
Canada.
I'm thinking of-
but let's say they are sage, and they are looking at their point of view, and they say, okay, we don't need dual citizenship. So we have 1 million people here, so we are going to put them in the calendar and say, okay, this part stays in Canada. Let's say half of them, and become Canadian. Do they still have to follow the FATCA?
if they haven't
No.
renounced their U.S.
No, if
ties.
Canada says that you don't have dual citizenship anymore, I would be as happy as a clam.
But it's not nothing.
I'm a Canadian.
But nothing said in the
Well, then I
agreement.
wouldn't- Yes, but if they said that I was stripped of my dual citizenship, as long as it was my American citizenship that was stripped off me, and because of that, the bank does not consider me a U.S. person, I would be happy as could be.
That is
But-
that is the tricky part.
Let's
U.S.
suppose-
person and the citizen are two different
Let's
things.
suppose that they, well, true, but let's just suppose they strip me of my Canadian citizenship, though. Then I'd
They
be,
can't do that.
they could do that. Why not?
Then you wouldn't be here, would
Well,
you?
they could tell me that I was extradited because of it.
Isn't that precisely what the proposed legislation is allowing? Stripping dual citizens of Canadian
Yeah,
citizenship?
yeah.
I think
It's
that's
not about
precisely
stripping
what
you
it's
of your
allowing. That's
other
right.
citizenship.
That's right.
Then that would worry me. So I'll go straight to the embassy and, and renounce. Yeah.
Peter's right.
Then it's not a good idea you be in this show at that moment.
No, it's not a good idea to be a dual. I would, yeah.
Actually, I think I'm not sure it's that at all. I think it's maybe not a good idea to be an American.
Yes, it's not a good idea to be an
Is
American.
the problem here.
at all.
An American outside of America, is basically the problem, I think, isn't it? I mean, Peter, you've renounced your American citizenship, haven't you?
Basically.
Basically?
What is basically?
You're partway there? You're basically
He's
there?
relinquished.
I
Relinquish.
relinquished my
Oh,
U.S.
yeah,
citizenship
yeah.
when I became a Canadian.
Okay, yeah, to be more precise. Okay, interesting.
Okay.
So, as concisely as possible, the one thing I think that this discussion has illuminated is that whatever's going on with this FATCA stuff, it sure is a bad thing for Canada and Canadians. So,
I want to make a point because you mentioned about the pipelines. The way I feel that Canada is becoming like a three-part entity, the same as three mainstream parties, NDP, Liberals, and Conservatives. The fight is not for the FATCA, is not for the American citizen, it's part of the larger picture. The fight is between the bankers, oilers, and union bosses. Put it this way, the way I see it. Sometimes I come to the idea, would it be possible to divide the country to three parts and say, okay, all of you conservative go in one part, all of you liberal go in another part, and all of the NDP. So we wouldn't have to spend all of these resources and money and the manpower to bickering and fighting with each other. Because the bottom line is here. We have a government that is protective of the oil companies. We have our opposition who was protective of the bankers is in the third degree now. And the union bosses, the party representing union bosses is in opposition. So they don't have anything to say because it doesn't really help them. So I believe FATCA or all of these small agreements are part of a bigger picture.
Somehow that Canada doesn't have something underneath that unifies.
Oh, they
Yeah,
do
sure.
have it, but it's not available to public like you and I.
Well, yeah.
Yeah.
I think the bigger picture you're suggesting is really just a world where individuals don't matter.
Of course.
Yeah.
Of course.
It's interesting. The early 70s, I think, there was a movie, an early James Caan movie called Rollerball. Anybody remember
Yes,
that
I
movie?
remember that. I
Oh, you do?
remember that.
Okay, interesting.
I remember
That's
that.
good. What it was about was essentially a world where it was run by corporations. And obviously not by people, but even governments, sort of being under the control of corporations. If you look at a situation like this, I mean, without complicating it and without getting into too many details, it would appear that the reason that the Harper government signed this IGA with the United States was to give a benefit to the banks at the expense of the individuals of Canada. Would that seem reasonable to you?
Absolutely.
Clear.
You brought the name of the movie. The recent movie that really complements that movie is Hunger Game.
I've not seen that one. What's that about?
That is about, again, corporations that run people and just individuals become a puppet, like old bread and circuses of Romans. Same thing is being applicable here.
Well, I really must see that because I've learned to see most of the world through either bumper stickers or movies, one of the two.
Probably those are the places that we can obtain our
Especially bumper
information.
stickers. They take less time to read.
The way the Hunger Games works is that the District 1 is the United States, and all the rest of the districts have to pay them tribute,
Yes.
including
Yes.
human life.
Yes. Are you talking about Hunger
I
Games?
must see this. Well, actually, on that theme, there's another one that I think is similar and sort of I think explains how FATCA actually works. Is the Tom Cruise movie Oblivion, which is essentially about some alien life force up in the sky that sends people to the remains of the planet Earth that look like human beings and uses them to sort of suck the resources out of the Earth back up to the alien life form. And it looks to me like the combination of FATCA and citizenship-based taxation is exactly that. I mean, all these U.S. persons in Canada are just being used as an excuse to suck the resources out of the country.
Yeah.
But we're coming to the end here. We're coming to the end here. But one question I'd like to ask is coming back to this fascinating article by Mr. Whiteley. Should people be worried about this? He says, get this. He says that some U.S. persons will escape detection.
It means that we're definitely criminals who are hiding.
You're going to escape. What do you think your chances are of escaping detection? And would you even want to?
Well, I think my chances are pretty high of escaping detection.
Except for one thing. If you travel to the United States.
Yeah, barring
No,
traveling
but
to the United States.
They stick your passport in. Not even, let's say they don't hassle you at the border. The point of the
Yeah.
system they're making is so they know exactly who comes in and who goes out.
Yeah.
Yeah,
I could
they're
escape
gonna be
detection
able-
as long as I never travel to the United States, let's say. I think I could. But that's not necessarily the case. I mean, I don't fall into the category of having so much in my bank account that they're going to flag me right away and then check to see whether or not I'm a U.S. person.
There's something about that too, after having actually looked at the IGA. It says an aggregate of accounts. So that if you have one bank, you have several accounts that total over 50,000.
I know, but I wish I did. There's not even a chance I'm even.
Well, the other thing that's interesting about
Yeah.
this is that under the rules, both under the law itself and under the IGA, the United States is perfectly free to define U.S. persons.
Right, that could be
And,
expanded to.
it's sort of like this. Yeah, today we'll define U.S. persons to be American citizens, and tomorrow the world.
Yeah.
Anyway, I think we're out of time, so that's Independent Nation for Monday, February the 10th. The citizenship thing has gotten to be an interesting topic.
And don't forget to vote and participate.
Yes, and vote for Bauman. Exactly, most importantly. Okay, thank you very much.
Thank you.
Thank you.